they want to show that they are a successful part of this axis of resistance, this part of this Iran-backed network of militias that have Western allies surrounded effectively from the south in the case of the Houthis in Yemen, from the north in the case of Hezbollah. And that's a concern for Saudi Arabia.
Israeli forces are indeed now pushing into the south of Gaza. Let's get the latest, as ever, from Richard Spencer, the Times' Middle East correspondent. Morning, Richard.
Good morning.
Is that the progress of the post-truce movement towards the south? Is that a sort of simplistic summary of where Israel is heading?
Yeah, not too simplistic. It's pretty comprehensive. They're still fighting in the north. Israel has Hamas units surrounded in parts of Gaza City and a couple of other towns in the north of Gaza, but they were pretty clear that they thought that most of Hamas had moved to the south because the army was concentrated on the north in that first part of the war. So now they're going after the south. Residents of Khan Yunis were warned that they were going to be next over the weekend, immediately after the ceasefire broke on Friday. On Friday night, the Israelis dropped leaflets saying that the east side of Khan Yunis, which is the second biggest city in Gaza, it's the biggest city in the south, was going to be targeted, and indeed it was.
The US is preaching caution. Anthony Blinken is. We talked about the window of legitimacy and how long that was open for Israel. Is it the same window of legitimacy post-truce as it was before truce? Because it sounds like they're going as hard, the Israelis, as they were before the truce.
Good question, really, because there were all sorts of rumors that President Biden had given Israel 2 weeks to finish this off after the truce and so on. I've seen no sign of that. What I have seen is a lot of emphasis from the Biden administration on changing the way it carries out its air campaign. The U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was in the region, and so was Kamala Harris, the Vice President, over the weekend, Friday, Saturday, and gave that message to the Israelis pretty clearly. Israel has, deployed a very, shall we say, euphemistically broad targeting methodology in this round of war, and that has, involved a very high level of civilian casualties, as everyone has seen. And I think that's what the Americans are focused on, are getting the Israelis to basically kill fewer civilians.
But there's no sign that's actually happening on the ground in the last couple of days, for example.
Well, Israel has produced this extraordinary new approach to warning civilians. So, one of the things that's changed, it's all fairly gruesome, but one of the things that's changed is that in previous rounds of war, if they were going to destroy a Hamas target or a target that was connected to Hamas in some way, which they were targeting for its physical contents, if you like, that there was some sort of Hamas command center or admin place or something, they would do a thing called knock the roof. They would put a small explosive, they would drop a small explosive on the roof of the building so that the civilians who were in the same apartment block or whatever it was could get out. And they don't seem to have done that this time. And that's one of the reasons why there's been this high level of casualties. A particularly high level of casualties. They've just gone straight after these Hamas targets. Now they are warning people more comprehensively with phone calls, with these letter drops, and with this extraordinary map they've published. They've published a map in which all of Gaza is divided up into little squares. And you're supposed to learn the number of the square you're in and surrounding squares. So if you get a phone call saying, leave square 10 and move to square 13, you know where to go to be safe, or to be safer, should we say. Now, some people are saying that's impossible to follow in the middle of a war when communications are poor. But on the other hand, internet does seem to be a bit better at the moment in Gaza. So maybe that is one way that Israel hopes to reduce the civilian casualties.
Meanwhile, Hamas is still firing rockets at Israel. And indeed, there was some talk that as the truce ended, or one of the reasons the truce was ending was because of continued rockets going into Israel from Hamas.
For sure, yeah. There doesn't seem to have been any major strikes by Hamas, but yeah, the sirens have been going off pretty regularly over the weekend over Tel Aviv and central Israel. Iron Dome, the famous Israeli air defense system, seems to have had it covered so far. Yeah, the end of the ceasefire was a curious thing because it ended when the hostage deal came to an end, fell apart. But yeah, Hamas does seem to have preempted the expected time for that ceasefire to run out with a couple of missiles, rocket firings. Though, as I say, they didn't get through the defense system.
And what price another truce? What is that being discussed? Are the Qataris still involved? Because there's still lots of hostages there. Will that happen again? What will happen, do you think?
Yeah, there's still about 130, between we're not quite sure for the sad reason we don't quite know how many of the hostages are dead. So we don't know quite how many living hostages there are, but we think it's somewhere in the region of 130 plus. Nearly all of them now are men. There are still a few women there, according to Israel. So women civilians, there are men and women soldiers. The Israelis have been fairly clear that ceasefire was just for women and children, and they have pulled their negotiators out of Qatar. The head of Mossad, David Barnea, was in Mossad for those talks, and he's now back in Israel. Hamas too say there'll be no more hostage releases until the end of the war. So it's not looking positive for any kind of resumption of that. Though, give it a couple of months, and both sides might feel there's time for another pause in the fighting, for another round of exchanges, but not in the immediate future. No.
That's a very bleak assessment. And before you go, Richard, can you perhaps explain to us? We talk about the danger of escalation in the region. Why would Iran-backed Yemenis fire on US and UK shipping? What's the geopolitical context for that?
I mean, the Houthis are an interesting organization. I think they're just very they've done very well out of the war in Yemen. They've effectively won the war in Yemen. They have control of the capital Sana'a and most of the populated areas of Western Yemen. And they want to show that they are a successful part of this axis of resistance, this part of this Iran-backed network of militias that have Western allies surrounded effectively from the south, in the case of the Houthis in Yemen, from the north in the case of Hezbollah. And that's a concern for Saudi Arabia. It's a sign, again, a sign from Iran telling the West that your absolute backing for Israel has consequences.
Well, it's fascinating to speak to you, Richard. Not very much good news to hear, alas. Richard Spencer, good to speak to you. He is the Times Middle East correspondent.